Hey, much as the little pup might be on the more disliked side, I've always stood by saying that the first season of Scooby-Doo and Scrappy-Doo is still a totally solid seasonal entry in the franchise. And ever since I picked up the season on DVD and gave it a good thorough watch a few years ago, there are a lot of either really good or really weird episodes I've wanted to talk about. Today we're getting into one of those that's a good mix of both, and stands out for a lot of reasons. It's even written by Douglas Booth and Glenn Leopold, like the episode Rocky Mountain Yai from the same season, which I did a video on recently. Leopold notably would go on to do many things for Scooby for long after, including writing Zombie Island and Witch's Ghost in the 90s. Today though, we're looking at Season 1, Episode 2, The Night Ghoul of Wonderworld, originally aired September 29, 1979. The titular Wonderworld is part of what makes this one so memorable. Before the tragically cancelled HBO series based on it, Westworld was an iconic 1973 film released 6 years before this episode, which like the TV show saw a theme park full of realistic themed worlds and completely lifelike animatronic people. Only things take a dark turn when the androids begin acting on their own and start hurting people. So this episode is basically Scooby's take on Westworld for a more family-appropriate audience. I loved the movie long before the TV show, but it's definitely not something I would say is appropriate for kids. So that makes it an interesting and fairly recent thing for Scooby to be referencing here at the time. Let's get into it and see how they did it. The episode opens up on a stormy night, a guard being startled by a large shadow that belongs to this creeper, who he identifies as the Night Ghoul of London as it lunges toward us. Later, the host of Wonderworld, Mr. Marino, greets the gang, with his character in both outfit and accent being a reference to Ricardo Montalban's character Mr. Rourke in the TV series Fantasy Island. He focuses on Velma in particular, whose fantasy is to solve a mystery with Sherlock Holmes. He then walks over to them to introduce them to the robots. And the weirdest thing about these early Scrappy appearances is that he walks on all fours like a real dog a lot of the time. Like Westworld, their host explains the robots are computer programmed and incapable of harming guests, though a lot of good that did in Westworld. The first one he brings out is kind of just the Incredible Hulk, and he tries to whack Scrappy, which is probably deserved, only for the censor to stop it. As for Velma's fantasy, Mr. Marino explains it's handled by the computer, the mystery itself even being a secret to him, and only Holmes being able to know or deduce it. He gets them into the train with driver Mr. Kemper to head to London World for a stay of 3 days, which sounds like a lot to commit to. Shaggy agrees, and this man, Alexander Wallhouse, also notes there is no way out until their time is up. Mr. Kemper explains that Wallhouse is also headed to London World, the man explaining he's an antique collector who's always wanted to visit Victorian London. They start their journey through the futuristic theme park, passing through Prehistoric World, a massive and terrifying dinosaur peeking in. We then pass Outlaw World, because of course we legally cannot use Westworld. Scrappy wants to stop here, but they shut the little run up because this trip is for whatever reason all about Velma. They arrive at King Albert Station and immediately are met by Holmes. And it really is kind of funny that Leopold would later go on to write the episode Sherlock Doo 5 years after this, where the gang meet a ghost version of Holmes, and Velma is the only one not in the episode. I covered that episode in my new Scooby-Doo Mysteries video, by the way, and because she's such a huge fan, Velma is geeked out bad to meet her hero, though Mr. Kemper makes sure to remind her he's still merely a robot. Holmes tells her she'll be his new assistant in place of Watson, who's away, immediately taking the iconic hat for herself. We get a taste of things as Wallhouse buys flowers from one of the robots, the gang saying they'll see him around, and his response is a creepy "I'm sure you will," so if anyone needs a suspect, go ahead and jot him down to be safe. Velma is fangirling over being at 221 Baker Street, and Holmes explains they're looking into the theft of the crown jewels of England, also not dissimilar to the later Sherlock Doo episode. Daphne is kind of gooped and gagged as if they don't know this is fake. Holmes' prime suspect is none other than the Night Ghoul of London, like we saw earlier. Velma reads that the jewels were on display at the Tower of London, which she says is their next stop, so they head over. A guard shows them the scene of the crime, which looks similar to what we saw prior. He even looks just like the one who saw the Night Ghoul at the start, but he says a different guard was on duty and it was too dark to see anything. However, the guard definitely identified the ghoul earlier. Let's remember all that. Velma wants to talk to the other guard, while the boys are waiting outside with one of them, and when they open a door, they find the real guard meant to be out there tied up. The fake guard spooks them, revealing himself to be the Night Ghoul. The boys try to run, but Shaggy steadies himself, remembering it's just a robot and can't hurt them. So they mock the bot that fell into the moat. Unfortunately, the water starts to short-circuit the robot, and its eyes become more evil-looking as it gets back up. The boys brag about what happened, and the others deduce that if the guard was the ghoul, and nobody left, the jewels must still be here. Velma thinks to simply remove this cloth, and there they are, never having moved. The idea was that the guard guards would be no longer watching an empty area, and the ghoul could come back to get them later. Velma explains to Holmes that she saw the picture where the case only went waist-high next to the armor, but now is up to the chest, indicating something underneath. The ghoul seems to be spying meanwhile, as Velma is sad the mystery is already over. Her fantasy continues though as the ghoul laughs and reveals himself, throwing a tapestry on everyone. Scrappy gets out and tries to rough him up, but the ghoul just stuffs him in the empty case, nabs the jewels, and runs off. The boys try to corner him, believing it to be safe, but now that he's increasingly dangerous, they realize something is wrong. Everyone worried about what could happen now. Outside, Holmes says the ghoul was last seen in the shadow of Big Ben, and Velma has the boys split off on their own. Scoo pokes his nose in a door that has a slide waiting, and the door just so happens to close and slam him down it, falling down a chute and hitting a robotic horse that splits in half. He tries to fix it, and somehow it keeps switching sides. It's all kind of weirdly gruesome with the horse still acting alive. Suddenly, Scrappy starts rising as the ghoul comes out from the manhole, so the guys try to run off with the brave puppy. They end up separated, with the ghoul trailing behind Scooby, resulting in a very frightened realization, but at least Scooby's escape has the ghoul trip on barrels and leads him back to his nephew. The others have more good news, as it seems the ghoul crashing finally stopped it, though Velma notices that the jewels aren't on him. Mr. Marino suddenly walks up to ask them how it's going, and he apologizes for the incident, giving them a refund for the remaining days since they already solved the mystery, and can even leave early. Velma, however, isn't leaving, to the shock of Mr. Marino, since she still hasn't found those jewels. Their host, in that case, does some work on Holmes to keep him working right, and wishes them luck as he disappears. The boys follow their nose to a place serving fish and chips that even Wallhouse enjoyed, so they take part in a snack for now. As Shaggy tosses some of the newspaper it was served in, Velma sees another article about the jewels, and seems to find something strange. Outside, the looming shadow of the ghoul darkens their way, standing up on the rooftop with a threat. Scrappy trusts it to just be a robot, but Shaggy points out the robotic ghoul is in the scrapyard. Trying to open him up unsuccessfully, Scrappy confirms this night ghoul is indeed the real thing, and he gives them one more warning before running off into the bookstore.
Puppy power!
Scrappy ends up tackling Mr. Wallhouse, however.
Hey, I'm just a doggy, and I'm allowed a few mistakes.
Someone tossed this pup into the doghouse. Mr. Wallhouse says he hasn't seen anything in here, and Fred finds a book talking about the night ghoul. According to this, he called his hiding place the Four Faces of Time. Velma astutely clocks that it means the Four Faces of Big Ben, but Holmes disagrees and says it means the Four Walls of Westminster Abbey. Velma's unsure, but trusts her hero if that's what he thinks. Fred sends the boys to check out Big Ben to cover all their bases though, and as we approach the iconic location, the boys are exhausted from their climb, only to fall through a secret entrance, leaving Scrappy. They find themselves right above the clock face, and also uncover the stolen jewels. No time to celebrate though, as the ghoul pops in from his own entrance in the floor, but Scrappy hears the screams and just crashes right through the brick wall. The boys run out onto the clock face to escape, and with Scrappy initiating a fight, they find themselves hanging on for their lives, and looking down below and seeing the height understandably does not help. Scrappy pulling on the ghoul ends with the creep falling back and the puppy falling down, while the boys bounce up and get to safety, just completely abandoning Scrappy to climb down away from the ghoul. Shaggy finally realizes and at least moves the hand of the clock up for Scrappy to get back to safety, but in doing so the clock strikes midnight and the bell starts to shake them all silly. Velma realizes the clock is striking 12 at 2 in the morning, which means something is not right, but Holmes tries to excuse it, slowly breaking down as he tries to come up with a lie. He ultimately blows a fuse and just starts short-circuiting all over, which seems to solve this for Velma as the trio rush to Big Ben. The boys are still trying to ditch the ghoul, so Scrappy starts speeding all the mechanical bits up with the boys going up and down, and the ghoul impossibly running until he's thrown against the wall finally. Just in time, the trio run in, while the boys are deeply dizzy. Back at 221B Baker Street, Shaggy asks an officer who's here to arrest the ghoul why Scotland Yard would be interested in the fake Wonderworld jewels. Velma reveals it's because they actually aren't fake though. These are the real crown jewels, which the officer confirms. Velma first notes the newspaper that Shaggy's earlier meal was wrapped in, which showed the same crime in the photo, but with a TV antenna, which isn't on the London World Tower, meaning it must be the real Tower of London, and thus that means there must be a real identical crime, the one we saw at the beginning of the episode that varied from the crime scene the gang saw. The criminal then proceeded to hide the jewels in plain sight in Wonderworld, but Velma's fantasy from the computer muddled things when the robotic Night Ghoul malfunctioned and stole the real jewels. The real criminal then had to dress as the Night Ghoul again and scare everyone off to find where they had been hidden by the robot. And as for our culprit, Velma unmasks him to reveal Mr. Marino. When they saw him the second time in London World, he mentioned the theft of the jewels despite supposedly not knowing about the mystery the computer chose, then pretended to examine Holmes, but actually short-circuited him to throw them off and make him useless. A job well done, Scooby as Holmes is served some snacks that Scrappy warns him is robot food, but he proceeds anyway and gets a mouthful of springs. Scooby-Doo! And that's the Night Ghoul of Wonderworld. A very unusual but still fun episode of the show, and you very much can see how Leopold, who wrote this episode, would go on to pull from a lot of the same things done in this episode for Sherlock Do only a few years later, which makes sense as there's only so many ways you can keep this kind of scenario fresh. It's also impossible to ignore how much this episode is basically just a more family-friendly version of Westworld. It's really just the plot of that movie with a few Scooby twists and turns. I don't mind though. I really do enjoy that movie and would even without the modern TV series. The Night Ghoul himself is also a decent enough villain. There's only so much you can do with a sort of Mr. Hyde-looking kind of character, but they make him interesting enough to look at. And Wallhouse is a decent enough red herring with his weird little moments and appearances. Especially being an antique collector, the idea of the jewels being real would point to him. It would have been fun to actually spend more time in the other worlds instead of just the one based on Victorian London. It does kind of make it feel like it's just a Sherlock episode and not taking full advantage of this scenario. It's kind of interesting that this is all based on fulfilling a fantasy for Velma, because they never really explained why we are doing this for her, or how she knows our host turned villain to begin with. How did she meet or find out about him and his theme park? And why are they all focusing the fantasy on her? Is it her birthday or something? Are we celebrating some kind of accomplishment? Who knows? Why our host went criminal beyond for the sake of it also remains questionable. He has a genuinely impressive theme park people are paying to visit. That should be plenty of profit without having to steal jewels. Anyway, I wouldn't say this is one of the best of the season, but the premise alone makes it one of the memorable ones. I think that's all I really have to say on it. I've covered a good couple of episodes of this season if you want to see more videos like it. The Patreon also is now live if you want to support the channel. I think there's at least one more video about an episode of this season to go, so I suppose I'll see you there. Bye!